Segment 2, pages 12 through 19, was my section for this first chapter. It starts with the rise of conditioning, and the first psychologist that they talk about is Edward Thorndike. He was an early comparative psychologist who was interested in studying animal learning. Thorndike experimented with cat intelligence using an apparatus he created called the puzzle box. The puzzle box was made of wood and chicken wire. The cat was placed inside behind a latched door, and food was placed nearby, outside of the door. The food was placed to strengthen the relationship between the situation and response, or the SR association. This can be explained by the law of effect, which Thorndike later proposed. The law of effect states that when a response, or the latch opening, is followed by satisfaction, which came from the food reward, an SR association is strengthened. When a response is followed by any type of discomfort, the SR association is weakened. Ian Pavlov was the next psychologist that they talked about in the chapter. Pavlov was a physiologist studying learning in animals, specifically focusing on the reflexes of digestion. Pavlov conducted experiments on digestion reflexes with dogs, but previous to Pavlov's most famous experiment, Pavlov's students studied salivation in dogs. Dogs salivate if food is introduced to the mouth, but after the food has been put in the mouth a few times, the dog soon salivated at the sight of the food alone. Pavlov's students called this the psychic reflex. Now we call it the conditioned reflex. This experiment allowed them to understand animals' brains from changing the reflex to salivated when eating to salivating seeing the food, through the conditioning of ringing the bell. The bell was rung prior, and then the food was presented. The next section was titled A Science of Learning and Behavior. This section began with the term structuralism, which was the school of thought that influenced psychology in America at the turn of the 20th century. Structuralists focused on analyzing the structure of the mind using the method of introspection, and introspection was looking into one's thoughts and analyzing them. However, structuralism had many problems because of introspection, such as the fact that we do not know how that the mind's contents are conscious and available for our own self-examinations, and that what are we going to do if two self-examinations disagree? It cannot be settled because they cannot be falsified or confirmed. Next person that they talked about in this chapter was John Watson. Watson was a comparative psychology professor who published an article that became known as the Behaviorist Manifesto. It highlighted that the problem with psychology was that it was too subjective. He argued that psychology should include the study of something objective and available to all, something that he concluded was behavior. Watson's call for the addition of behavior, something that can be confirmed or falsified, to be included in psychology challenged the previous notion of introspection, something that cannot be confirmed or falsified. His behaviorist movement changed the world of psychology forever. Watson performed a conditioning experiment that was central to his vision. It was called the Little Albert experiment, and it was done on a boy named Albert who was the age of 11 months when he participated in the experiment. Little Albert was shown a white rat, and when he reached out to touch the rat, the scientist would scare him by pairing his reaching with a very loud noise that frightened him. This eventually conditioned Albert to have an emotional response of fear, just as the dogs in Pavlov's experiment had a salivary response. Albert's conditioned response was so strong that fear of the rat was generalized to other furry things such as rabbits and fur coats. Watson focused on behavior and learning are an integral part of psychology today. The last person that they talked about in this chapter was B.F. Skinner. Skinner followed Watson, developing a different type of behavioralism called radical behavioralism. In his writings, he documented the meaning of the reflex and how, given the stimulus, a response is likely to occur. Skinner introduced the very first Skinner box. During this time, rats were typically studied in a maze. However, Skinner, instead of a maze, put a rat in a small box that closed and had a lever to operate it. When the lever was closed, food was placed in a cup attached to the inside of the box, and the rat learned that when it pushed the lever, the food would be delivered to the cup. The Skinner box is known as an operant experiment. The lever pressing response is called operant because it operates on the environment. So the food pellets that were put in the cup are therefore the reinforcer because they are consequences that increase the rate of responding. The difference between Skinner's rat and Thorndike's cat was that the rat could choose to press the lever whenever it wanted, so that response was voluntary, while the cat only had one opportunity until the experiment was set up again. So the Skinner box brought light to the fact that pressing the lever was completely voluntary. The voluntary response is still related to the environment as it increases or decreases according to the payoff or reward. The operant experiment also uncovered a new kind of empirical correlation between behavior and environmental events. The operant response is related to its consequence. Therefore, if the food pellets are no longer presented, the lever will stop being pressed because there is no reward. The chapter also mentions in this section a psychological reflex arc, which is a take on this operant experiment. The sensory neuron responds to a stimulus, abbreviated as S, which activates a motor neuron to elicit a response, abbreviated as R. The correlation is different for Skinner than Pavlov because the response is elicited by an antecedent stimulus, a response due to the events that precede it. The operant-respondent distinction is the respondent controlled by antecedents and it's elicited, whereas the operant is controlled by consequences and emitted. Thank you.